Welcome back to the next session. FTX 2021 continues. This next session is a fireside chat between the top CTOs from the startup world. You see, now that we live in the 20s, that is the 2020s, the era of the I'm not doing so great Gatsby, otherwise known as the last gurgle of the toilet flush of human civilization. But excuse my cynicism. What's happened, especially in the pandemic, is our phones have become a substitute for conscious thought. Why think when you can phone? But now that you are phone and not think, the phone better work properly, especially after everyone starts using it. Which is why our next session is about building platforms for scale. So please allow me in welcoming the CTOs of some of the biggest tech platforms in India. So here for the fireside chat. Put your hands together in your houses and join me in welcoming on stage Dale Vaz, the CTO for Swiggy, Rahul Chari, the CTO for Phonepe, and Shashank Kumar, our very own CTO and co-founder of Razorpay. All right, guys, take it away. I will be backstage watching, not judging.
Hey, thanks, Karan. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the session Scaling with Tech at Razorpay FTX 2021. Today, we are going to talk to two of the marvels of the startup industry. Rahul Chari, who is the founder and CTO of Phonepe, the largest UPI payments app and also perhaps the fastest growing fintech app in not just India, but worldwide. And I have with me Dale Vaz, the Chief Technology Officer of Swiggy, who has helped Swiggy scale from a few thousand orders to tens of Okay, sorry, some technical glitch. Yeah, so I was just saying that today we are going to talk to two of the mavericks of the startup industry. Rahul Chari, who is the founder and CTO of Phonepe, the largest UPI payments app and also the fastest growing fintech app in worldwide, right? And Dale Vaz, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Swiggy, who has helped Swiggy scale from a few thousand orders to tens of lakhs of food and grocery order delivery every single day. Now, to quickly get started, Rahul, I wanted to ask you, what's the scale of of your engineering team and engineering system, which is able to deal with the mammoth scale of transactions at Phonepe?
Thanks, Shashank. Great to be here. Great to be with Dale and you. And what's a session between CTOs without not one, but a couple of technical glitches, looks like. The scale of Phonepe from an engineering strength perspective, we are around 550 engineers. That's everything put together, 250 engineers from the back end, around 100 engineers on our app engineering team. And then the remaining 200 make up our infra teams, our security engineering team, UI team, and QA team. Extremely proud that these 500 odd engineers actually drive around 80 million transactions on a daily basis. That's the transaction volume that we see. We, from just sheer value perspective, that's more than 10,000 crores of money movement, at least information movement about money on a daily basis, right? And our app opens on a daily basis across 100 million sessions. So that's the scale that we deal with, and it's with 500 engineers, which I think is a feat by itself.
And Dale, on the same topic, right? So a lot of people ask me, right, if you're going to deliver food from point A to point B, or get payment from person A to person 2, right? Why do you need so many engineers to make it happen?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks, Shashank, for having me here, and also hello to Rahul. It's great to be here today at the FTX 2021 summit. Talking about Swiggy and the question you asked, Shashank, on why do we need engineering bandwidth? Why do we even need a lot of tech for something as simple as delivering food? I think when you think about what we are doing at Swiggy, there's a complex interaction between the customer, there's the driver, and there's your partner. Could be a restaurant, could be a store, could be a pharmacy, and so on as we go into other categories. And at any point in time, any of these entities are moving. So a customer may come into the app in the morning. The customer may kind of come in from a different location. Similarly, the driver may be available today, maybe logging out in the next 10 minutes. Similarly, your restaurant may be open today, maybe closing in the next 10 minutes. Maybe there's a bunch of people at the restaurant, so the kitchen is overloaded. So there's lots of variabilities happening, right? And in between all of that, you then have the actual ecosystem where you have traffic, you may have some kind of issues. Maybe there's a local bund somewhere where the city is closed. Maybe there are issues with some kind of curfew where over a certain time you can't deliver. So net, when you think about Swiggy, we are trying to basically ensure that the millions of orders that we deliver on a daily basis are delivered within a very short period of time and within high level of on-time accuracy. And that actually is really complex, because if you were to abstract it, we are in the business of trying to manage chaos. There is a natural chaos in a country like India when you think about all the complexity. If you imagine yourself trying to drive through the city, I'm sure you will have difficulty being able to predict the exact time that you will be able to reach, even if you do the same drive 10 times in a row, right? Every time there could be a different scenario happening. Even if you think of yourself as a restaurant partner, you don't know if, for example, 20 people walk into your restaurant and suddenly you have to prepare a lot of food. So there's so much of complexity because of the fact that things are completely dynamic, things are completely changing very often on the ground. There's rain, there's traffic, there's weather, and all of that, we are trying to, in some sense, bring some form of consistency to this chaos. And that's where we bring a lot of tech in. We bring a lot of ML systems to be able to predict and be able to look forward into the future. We bring a lot of tech where we are able to actually run a bunch of computations and identify which customer can be served by which restaurant, by which driver. So there's a lot of complexity underlying, but the key reason why we have tech at Swiggy is essentially we are trying to maintain and manage this chaos and provide customers a great experience despite all the underlying challenges in the network.
If I can jump in, Shashank, on that one.
Go ahead. Absolutely.
I think the question is a very fair question, right? We don't need as many engineers to deliver food from point A to point B or to send money from person A to person B. But at the point that you're catering to 1 billion Indians, I think that question completely shifts, right? Sending money when it's today we cater to 1 in every 3 adult Indians. When everybody wants to send money or order food at the same time, just before an IPL game, you have issues that are the herding effect or significantly high concurrency. Add to that the need to ensure that every payment succeeds or every delivery is completed, right, at scale. Add to that the fact that at scale, you're supposed to be able to actually detect whether there are frauds happening, the systems are secure. Add to that the need to actually have business continuity capabilities across multiple data centers. We run across 4 data centers now with systems being active. And then compliances, regulatory needs, right? We need to ensure that everything is kosher. There is audit trails for everything that is done. We need to ensure that as an ecosystem, like Dale mentioned, we are basically bringing a whole bunch of actors together. In our case, it is the banks, it's the payment gateways, the users themselves, and the merchants. But you are threading this together, and ultimately the need to basically ensure everything is successful or self-healing at scale requires a fair amount of intelligence in systems, right? That's where ML comes in and data sciences come in. So I think everything shifts as soon as you hit a certain scale, and then it's like feeding the beast. Because after that, the number of potential use cases that you can build with the consumer at the center of it only increases. So I think the question is a fair one until you hit the inflection point, which every founder wants to hit, right? So yeah, that's really the answer. And if any founder has asked this, I'm pretty sure the question was asked by a non-tech founder.
Yeah. Actually, it's very one point that is there, right? I kind of think that the reason some of the companies are really successful is because they have been able to scale their systems with the business growth, right? Because a lot of companies actually fail because they are not able to scale their engineering, their technology, and support the business in a way that it allows the business to grow exponentially year on year and month on month, right? So for someone, for for founders or product leaders or engineering leaders, who have a team of 20-25 engineers, right, and want to build for scale, right? There's always this, the complexity that you talked about, right? All of us understand. I mean, many of us understand that you have to solve this complexity. You have to build things the right way to take care of scale long term over a period of few years. That is there, right? And there's this constant tussle between, especially between business and engineering, right? Like product engineering, like how should I build this, right? Should I go fast? Should I ship it out quickly? Or otherwise, like I need more time, and I need to build it the right way, right? Not just ship things on a daily basis, because that will obviously keep breaking, but build it for scale even when that scale is not present.
I think it's a great if I may, actually, I would share an anecdote on this, right? There's this always debate between, do I build for the future or do I build something first, prove the business model, and then figure out how to build it. And back before I joined Swiggy, I was working at Amazon in Seattle. And this was a few years ago, many years ago, actually, where we were trying to propose the launch of a website called Amazon India. At that point, Amazon was not in India, and there was this discussion happening in Seattle around trying to say, let's figure out whether we should invest in launching Amazon in India. And so we had all the Amazon leaders in the room, including Jeff Bezos, who was there in the room, and we were talking about the business. And then the conversation came to tech. And the question there was, okay, how do we make sure that Amazon India is able to move fast and be as nimble as any other startup in India? Right. And so the initial proposal that I think Jeff made was, why don't we let the team do what they have to do and just go and build any software they have to do to be able to win for India. Let's not worry about using the global platform. Let's not worry about building for the future. Let's not worry about making this an amazing tech. And then we went around the room, and almost all the leaders in the room were initially quite concerned about that recommendation, because they felt that if we just went off and just built something, it would be a very short-term focus. And of course, tech should be long-term, and we need to make sure we are building scalable systems on day one. And this debate continued for some time in the room, and we weren't able to converge on an answer. And then finally, Jeff spoke up in that meeting. And what he said was very enlightening for the entire group. He said, folks, guys, if we have a great business 5 years from now, I can always go back and build a great tech and rebuild the great tech. But if I have a great tech and no business, it doesn't matter. We have lost. Right? So in some sense, that was a very clarifying moment for me also. And I've taken that same kind of thing to Swiggy, because when I look at choices we are making, I think at some point, everybody wants to build for the future. Everyone gets excited about building this. But I come from a camp of saying we need to make sure we are building for the customer first. We need to make sure that what we are building serves for a certain customer need. And then we can figure out if we want to scale it. Because many times when we have gone live, even in Swiggy, we have done multiple projects where we thought we had a great idea. And then after building it out, we realized that customers actually don't really like it so much. And so in some sense, you almost want to get out as fast as possible, get customer feedback, and then figure out how to scale tech. So I would say my bias is more about getting customer feedback loops first before I decide how much I want to scale my tech.
But Rahul, if you get to that inflection point, and actually that's a great point, right? That you have shipped things, you have built systems, but you are getting hammered, like you are getting growth, right? And now you have to think about like how you should scale technology in a very short period of time. And obviously, in a lot of these scenarios, the systems are not built in the way to think about like we are getting 5x or 10x traffic, right? Then what is the usual approaches that you have dealt with? And I'm sure like you have had many such scenarios happening at Phonepe.
I have a slightly different view to this, and the problem is if you actually reach that inflection point at which systems are breaking, the business and the product has found that product market fit, which is actually ready for explosion. It's generally a spiral into tech debt hell, right? And it becomes extremely difficult, and the conversations just become more difficult. The decisions become more difficult in terms of taking a step back to be able to actually future-proof your systems, redesign it, and try to then go back to market, because the question will always be, are we losing momentum, right? And are we going to be on the back foot just because we're going to take the foot off the pedal? I think then we need to actually strike some sort of a middle ground. And what has worked for us at Phonepe is about the fact that we have a very, very clear understanding of what are our core systems and what we call as peripheral systems. This does not mean peripheral systems are necessarily less important or the teams are less important. What it really means is that my ability to growth hack on the peripheral systems is a green signal, and the growth hacking on the core systems is a strict no-no. In fact, to the extent that the expectation that is set is that the course, any change or new capabilities, more than change, new capabilities in core systems will take at least a quarter, right? It's not an easy decision, but it has multiple positive side effects. One, it actually ensures that teams start to take the maximum out of features that they are building rather than actually go to the next shiny feature that they want to actually build. Like Dale said, ideas are a dime a dozen. And many times, if you actually entertain every idea and build tech for that, you will realize that a larger number of them are really failing and you're actually shelving more than you're actually building on top of, right? So I think that is a good forcing function to maximize your V1s into V2s and V3s before going to the next V1. Secondly, I think it sets a certain nomenclature in the company about capabilities that need time to build should be built with a 10x view. I think 10x engineering is a hotly debated topic. In my view, I don't think there are 10x engineers, right? I think the good engineers are the ones who build platforms that can create 10x value. There is, if you actually are able to build platforms that are generalized enough to take care of not just the use case and solution here and now, but can unlock more value over the next 2 years, I think then the belief in the system and the company as a whole across functions in that increases. Now, this is a tough decision, especially with a engineering team that you're starting off with 20 engineers. It's still useful to make that one investment as a core platform or capability that is almost ring fenced from the rest of the system and then start showing value. It should be based on merit based value creation, and then the investments will only increase over time. Similarly to what Dale said, there's nothing wrong in trying to go fast to market with possibly a suboptimal solution that is not necessarily built for the future, but to have plans to ensure that we are out of band addressing it before we start band-aiding it, I think is an important decision to be made. At the point that you're starting to band-aid just to meet the demand here and now, and that happens more frequently than you want to, you know that you're kind of in red zone already.
But wouldn't that, just coming back to the topic, right? Wouldn't that go against the advice that, you should keep experimenting, like what you talked about, like, keep building features till you find product market fit, or keep doing things, different experiments at different points of time to figure out like where the next phase of growth is going to come from?
I think if anybody looks back, right, and looks at all the ideas that they've created and then all the and features and solutions they created out of that, and look at the sum of the value that it created for the company, and thought of if we had been a slightly more thoughtful about what we need to be launching, serialize some of it versus parallelize some of it, Monday morning quarterback. But I'm telling you, the sum of the value will be less when you've actually thrown more. If you throw the kitchen sink at everything that you can do, the sum of the enterprise value that you've created might actually be lower, right? Having said that, I think identifying what your peripheral systems are and trying to actually ensure a lot of the experimentation is there versus trying to actually experiment all over the place. I'm not talking about not experimenting. I'm talking about guardrailing the experiments to certain parts of the system that you have consciously decided that you will experiment on, and protect some of it, which is your core IP.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. I think the key thing is what I call situational leadership. In some sense, as a CTO, the most important function that we do is being able to pick and choose where we want to build versus buy, where we want to move fast versus want to invest for the future, where we want to really push the team versus let the team take its time. It's really about making those choices, right? And as Rahul said, this decision around when do you go fast to market versus when do you really build for the future is really a situational decision. And I'll give you an example about how in Swiggy we've done that back almost 2 years back when we started this Instamart journey. And before that, Instamart, we used to call it Swiggy stores. So when the Swiggy stores were starting, we already had a food business that was meaningfully scaled and was doing million orders plus per day. So it was pretty meaningful in scale. At the same time, we also had this idea that maybe we should start doing grocery and do store pickup and delivery of non-food items. And so I would be in meetings where I'm sitting in a meeting and I'm talking to the delivery platform team for Swiggy, and they are the ones supposed to make sure that every single of our million orders are delivered on time. And I'm kind of like working with them, and we're discussing about how to make sure we are building for scale and how we are never going to make sure that we ever fail. Right? So we're spending like the 1 hour just talking about, let's focus on what is the next thing we need to do, how do we upgrade our platform, how do we move to the next generation, but make sure it lasts. And then the next meeting, I move into a different room, and there you have the Swiggy stores team, where they are waiting, saying, Dale, we want to be able to launch in 3 months, and we don't know what we don't know, but we need to move quickly. And immediately I'm switching my head, and I'm thinking, guys, do what it takes to launch. Don't worry about tech. Just go for it. If you have to build your own custom solutions, build your own custom solutions. And literally over the last 2 years, we've been living in the dichotomy in Swiggy. We have one part of the organization building out core food platforms that have scaled beautifully. And we have another part of the organization we call the new initiatives team, which is essentially building out tech that is really focused on trying to experiment fast. And part of my role is to figure out how to converge them. And we are converging systems by systems. But a large part of my role is also making sure that you are looking at the context of when you need to decide when to move fast versus when you need to take time and really build things for scale. So I guess the answer is there's no simple one way. Not you have to. That's really what I guess the job is.
So I think Dave summed up our day job, by the way. That's perfectly our day job. And no, I think it's totally right. It's case by case. There are opportunities. Opportunities have to be weighed end to end, right? What is the business opportunity? Is it sometimes just strategic opportunities? Sometimes more forced by compliance, regulation, etc. The only other part of our role, like he said, is to look at what are the 1, 2, 3, or 4 investments that we make with a long-term view. And you could have cycles when that investment is just 1 or even 0, and there are cycles when you have the luxury to actually make more of those investments. If we continuously make those investments, I think then you build a culture of trying to continuously weigh this. I think in our role, the main thing would be, can we actually not be the only ones doing this? But this actually becomes how the engineering organization thinks about it, and also the rest of the organization, because they start seeing the value through it.
So just on that context and the decision making that you talked about, right? How do you decide what is the shelf life of this technology going to be that I'm building right now, right? And how do you communicate that to the product and the business stakeholders, right? That because a lot of times that I've seen is that people don't understand what does shelf life of technology mean, or even how do you kind of come to that period that I'm building for next 1 year, or I'm building for that next two years, right? Especially for a lot of folks who don't understand that everything. I mean, engineering obviously people systems are built. A lot of systems are built for 10 years, 20 years as well, right? Versus in startups, we're always thinking of where is my next funding going to come from, or where is my next phase of growth going to come from.
Hey, tell me where we are building for 10 years, 20 years, man. I want to go and learn from there.
I was
I was in Microsoft, and we had a 25-year-old code base as well, which was working perfectly fine. So
no, I think typically the view that we take is we actually take a view that what we are building, especially on platforms at scale, we build with a 2-year view, right? And we take 2 year as the future provisioning, both in terms of scale, performance, as well as whatever functional capabilities that we have line of sight to and we can extrapolate to. Now, having said that, will they always last that? No, right? I mean, it's very difficult to actually guarantee that. Whenever we need to get into any phase of rewrite, right, between incremental improvements and a complete rewrite, it's a whole paradigm of opportunities or methodologies that you can apply. But whatever we do, the one thing that is important that at least we follow as a principle is, when we are improving systems, the last time that we actually made a major improvement, are we going to get longer shelf life this time or not? That is one thing that we force ourselves to answer, because it really, really helps. Otherwise, you just get into trying to solve for the here and now. The second one is outside of scale and performance, which is typically where we start reinvesting in rewriting or designing systems. We actually put up at least a 1-pager about the product improvements and business opportunities that this creates classic example is many rewrites are around modularization that helps with greater agility when it comes to new functional use cases that need to get implemented, right? So we try to also translate and build into a rewrite benefits that the product and the business organization will see, and we hold the engineering team accountable to delivering towards that, and we evangelize that, and that really helps.
If I may add there, Shashank, I think the way at least I've looked at this entire question of like building for 2 years, 3 years, I guess the reality is that no one can see the future well enough. And if we did, then we'd probably be very rich by now. But because the fact that we aren't very rich means that we haven't really been able to crack the future, right? And so from that perspective, as a technologist, I look at the question as two different pieces. There are architectural patterns that are evolving and architectural patterns that have lasted the test of time. And even in the future, as new frameworks come up, those things are extremely important. And then there are technology solutions that actually implement those architectural patterns. Let me give you an example, right? So if you think about this entire distributed architecture that people talk about, today you have Kafka and you have SNS and SQS and you have all these different messaging infrastructures that allow people to be able to react to events and asynchronously process millions and millions of events, right? So you can argue that that is something that is very powerful as a technology solution. Now, the interesting bit is that particular architectural pattern of basically using a queue-based processing with an event listener that listens to a queue, that is something that has been around for many, many years. In fact, almost like 20 years back, I remember coding when IBM MQ series, message queue series, there used to be a technology that IBM implemented, which basically was nothing but a queue-based technology, which allowed you to post a message to a queue and then read from that queue. So when you think about technology choices, I think the key thing for people to remember is how do you separate out the technology implementation choices you're making from the architectural choices you're making. And at Swiggy, what we really focus is more on the architectural focuses. We built a blueprint which basically talk about saying, here are some architectural patterns that we will implement. For example, we will move away from relational databases to a NoSQL database because that allows us to scale horizontally much better. Now, that NoSQL database in today's world could be DynamoDB, could be Scala, could be MongoDB. Tomorrow could be 5 other technologies. That's immaterial. So what I look for and what I look for lasting technology investments is saying, how do I move the company forward in terms of adopting better architectural patterns? And of course, we keep rewriting the implementations. We've written systems in Java. We are now writing them in Golang. We've written them and rewritten them in Scala. So we keep enhancing and improving the technology implementation. But the core architectural pattern that we've built out, those are more long-lasting. And I think that's how, if you kind of break down the problem, you may end up building systems that last much longer because those patterns are going to be much longer lived than the technology choices you made.
Actually, that's, someone asked in the chat as well, right, whether technology choices really eventually really matter. I think they really do, right? I mean, all the technology itself is based on certain fundamental principles, whether you're adopting like a NoSQL database versus a transactional database. All those choices are something that you have to live with, whether it's for next 1 year or 2 years, right? So making informed choices around those aspects are eventually very important, right?
Actually, they matter all the way through the stack, even on the hardware, right? Whether on the bare metal, what is your configuration, how your VMs are configured, what is the memory requirements, and having design patterns that are almost anchored as principles for the company, like Dale mentioned, are priceless, right? Like we follow obviously a complete asynchronous model. We have a shared nothing architecture. We don't allow caching at any central layer to avoid any sort of staleness in data, which is a huge no-no for a payments company. We have a very strong design pattern around all our applications being an orchestrator model. So it's almost rinse and repeat for a lot of the design patterns and architectural choices. Technology will keep getting updated, and technology needs to actually get tested in one system, and then on the merit of performance there, as quickly as possible, upgraded across systems so that you actually have an out-of-band model of refreshing your stack on a continuous basis. And I think a big plus one to what Dale said, I think that is the holy grail. After that, I think you may actually get into a model where the number of rewrites are less. It is really BAU when it comes to actually maintaining scale and performance.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think it's a common question I've also been asked by many young engineers saying, hey, which language should I learn? Is Scala important? Should I learn Golang? Hey, should I learn this particular technology. And I keep going back to this thing, learn the patterns, learn the architectural design patterns, because those things are going to last. And of course, today you may learn Scala, maybe tomorrow there's a new language come out which is even better than Scala, or maybe there's something that's more efficient than Golang. Those are things will keep changing over the course of your time. But what you've learned as design patterns, as algorithms, the base constructs of computer engineering, those are going to last us for a very long time, and they seem to come back in different forms even over a long period of time.
Got it. No, that's tell me something. You folks talked about a lot of technology terms, right? And we have a lot of product managers in the chat as well. How important is it for product managers and other people, technical project managers who deal with engineering on a day-to-day basis, to understand these terminologies and to debate on some of these aspects? And just as a follow-up to that also, right? Like, whenever you talk about, like, look, I mean, we need to rebuild this system, right? And that usually, I mean, and that is where it kind of comes down to, like, okay, like, do we need to pause our new feature development to invest in rebuilding a core system, right? And that itself becomes a huge topic in most scenarios. Even in small teams of 30, 40 people, these questions keep coming up again and again. So how do you convey that to other product leaders or business leaders in the organization?
Look, I think where we are all headed, I don't think there is a very strong differentiation between who's a technologist, right? I mean, engineering is different than product and business, but everybody really needs to be a technologist. Everything is technology right now. I mean, our business is technology. Even traditional companies are digitally transforming themselves, which means they're becoming centrally dependent on technology and new age technology. So I think the level of understanding that is expected from all functions has definitely increased, right? It was sufficient to understand what an API is in a few years back, but now it is a need to actually understand APIs and to some extent what really a database is and how a database can become a choking point and how typically concurrency operates. So the conversations then become more real about, okay, we get the problem. What is the value add that can get created by certain cycles of, if you may call it, out time or timeouts that you may take? I think the accountability on engineering to continue to ensure that you don't need to bring stock to business, but to actually look at the patterns early on where you need to make these investments possibly under the hood from not bringing business to a stop, but not under the hood from the roadmap itself. You need to actually have the conversations with product managers and business folks about how the roadmap needs to always have an engineering excellence track. So one of the things that we do is ensure that every team, irrespective of if it's the core platforms team or not, starts looking at whether quarter over quarter they do have an engineering excellence track, so that it almost becomes expected that you will always be working on improvements. You will always work on improvements, trying to actually explain what value it gets. If it's scale, it's scale. If it's scale and performance, it is performance. If it is agility, that is there. But you need to have that track, and you need to hold yourself accountable to it. I think that's the expectation to understand and appreciate technology, 100% there. Accountability on engineering to ensure that if that is there, they're also trying to ensure that this is as BAU as possible and as transparent as possible towards the roadmap.
Wonderful. I think,
I want to add a small point about how we've approached it at Swiggy, Shashank, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I think to Rahul's point, definitely one of the learnings we've had. So previously, just to give you some context, previously we had a very functional organization where you had a product organization and then you have an engineering organization and then you have a business organization. Each function pretty much is the domain expert in their area. And what we realized is that there are a couple of issues with that model. One is that you create these functional silos where the product manager may say, I know everything about the customer, but I'm not really sure about how it's going to be built. So I'm just going to depend upon this functional expert called the senior engineer to give me the estimates, right? Which of course creates those questions saying, why is it taking us 3 months? I don't know. Engineering gave me 3-month timeline. Chalo karte hai. So there's that issue where you have these black boxes or these information asymmetry that exist. And then the second thing, as you think about it, is that you realize that even on the engineering side, slowly the belief sets that, hey, my product manager does not understand technology. My product manager does not understand the challenges I'm going through. So I don't think this product manager will actually appreciate the complexity of what I'm dealing with. And there's that other side of the coin where the engineers feel like maybe their viewpoint is not being heard, maybe their perspective is not being heard. So I think we moved away from that kind of functional things that Swiggy to now this world we call the stream world. And Rahul, in fact, was one of the guys who gave us a lot of insight about that. We were discussing with him also about how he's done it at Phonepe. But in the stream world, we basically said you need to work together. Product engineering, analytics, data science all work together. And in some sense, we've seen that the product managers need to become a lot more aware of what the tech is, because their ability to define product solutions also means that they should understand what's in the current tech stack right now. And similarly, on the engineering side, when an engineer says, I need to refactor a system where I need to build a new platform, we've said you need to also be able to articulate back to the product manager what are the incremental business benefits that they can get from this new platform. So we've actually switched the tables all together and said, engineer, why don't you tell us why it's a good idea for you to build this platform again? And then we've heard some really good reasons from our engineering team, because we realized that they actually really have deep understanding of not just what the system needs now, but also what's coming down the pipe. And we very often found that we have to invest in these platforms because these things are going to help us for the next set of 10 things we want to do at Swiggy. So I do think it's both product learning more about tech, at the same time, tech and engineering also having a very strong perspective of what's good for the business and how their technology can help it.
Great. I quickly want to jump into the next question. We have about 15 minutes left. It's my favorite topic, hiring. Every founder that I talk to in the ecosystem, right? Like, every founder and engineering leader, they obviously want to change the world, right? But the limitation comes in, like, how do I hire my next 5 engineers, with the market being like what it is, right? And that becomes the biggest, sometimes the biggest stumbling block instead of the business growth itself, right? So what is the secret sauce that has worked for you folks in terms of, scaling your engineering teams?
Look, I think I was talking to a couple of founders the other day, and they're telling me they're 3 of them, and they said their 100% of the time goes in tech hiring and convincing engineers to join them. They're not able to even focus on the product or the business. Fundraise is easy because that's just happening for everybody automatically, so there's no time spent there anyway. But jokes apart, I think there hasn't been a better time to be an engineer in the ecosystem, right? It's great opportunities, obviously great compensation packages, but ultimately what really works, and this may sound cliched, is the quality of work. And this applies both from people within the organization as well as candidates who are planning to join the organization. I think a culture that actually has empowerment, space for innovation, decision making, not as just lip service, but you have actually structurally organized yourself to be able to ensure that you're enabling that. You can't just say that we are like that, but you have to enable it. So we need that. We need to actually create a structure where people, engineers specifically, learn quite a bit. One of the things that I'd like to actually tell any engineer who's listening to this is out there is that investment in your own career with a view of learning does not happen overnight, and you need to spend time in any organization that you're there for at least a few years. And if you take a slightly longer term view to that, compensation will actually jump multifold, because we all as managers, when we are hiring, recognize the kind of value that you have created in the past organization and put a huge alpha to that when we are trying to actually hire you. And that keeps reducing if the thought process is around trying to actually just be a little short term with your career, purely from a compensation perspective. And similarly with the companies, they need to take this seriously and ensure that on the job learning is real, right? So rotating people fairly continuously, almost maniacally, to ensure that their learning is not getting stagnated by being just in one team or pod. Having, like Dale said, a pod structure wherein we are exposing engineers not just to product, but to product, business, and the P&L, and having a high level of data transparency so that they can actually operate like a mini startup end to end with decision making, and to actually have clearly opportunities to innovate, right? And innovation, I think, is not just building the next big thing. at huge scales, incremental improvements, right, to me are huge innovations. They're significantly more complex and significantly more impactful. So I think being organized in a manner that the individual's learning is real and communicating that when you're hiring goes a long way, right? But these conversations need to happen, and the conversations need to be backed by real life examples, right? And they need to be not by the hiring manager or the CTO or the founder. It has to be with every person in the interview panel being an ambassador of that. If that reflects, right, I think it does make hiring a little easier, and the conversation goes beyond just the compensation.
Dale, how has hiring been for you in last 1.5, 2 years, right? And what is the advice you would have for, for founders out there to, really master that craft?
So first, let me be clear. I don't think I've mastered hiring in any way. So I don't think I'm qualified to give anyone, even less so a founder, advice on hiring. But yeah, at Swiggy, over the last 3 years that I've been here, we've increased our tech team size by 4x. It's been an interesting journey. I think a lot of what Rahul said makes absolute sense to everybody. And I hope you've taken notes, because you have to focus on culture. You have to focus on learning as a key kind of reason for people to be there. You have to focus on what's in it for them. I think in addition to that, I think what I've also learned is a lot of people are, think about salary. Salary is like a dopamine hit, like it's like a drug. You pop it, you get a high for that first 1 hour, 1 day, 2 days. When you see that offer come in, you go and tell your friends and family about it. And then after 2 days, nobody wants to listen to your story about your salary. People move on, right? And now you're stuck with a salary. But if you're stuck with a high salary in a bad job, then you're going to have a very painful time every day of your life working in the company where you may not like the team, you may not like the job, you may not like the policies, the culture. And that salary hit that you got when you got the offer won't last you for that time. So as an employee and as an employer, I think a lot of our focus has to be on saying, how do we build a great employee experience where people get a hit when they get the salary offer, which should be a good offer. Obviously, we want to make sure that engineers are being compensated well, product managers are being compensated well, scientists are being compensated well. So that's a hygiene in the current world. But beyond that, the experience they have in their journey in the company needs to be an experience where they feel every day is giving them a peak moment. Every day is giving them a dopamine hit. And for us, I think that's where we need to focus on. So what we do, for example, at Swiggy is we've turned a lot of these processes on the head. We've said, let's move away from the old world of manager-led processes to employee-led processes. For example, promotion process, we have engineers assess other engineers and decide when the engineer is ready for promotion. And when the assessing engineer provides the vote, we go ahead and say, let's promote this person because their peer group has signed off on the promotion. We don't need 5 managers to get into a room and decide whether the engineer gets promoted or not, right? Or in case of the entire tech innovation, as we've talked about, we've created dedicated bandwidth in the roadmap called Tech Innovation Streams, where we have more than 30% of our effort just allocated towards tech-related innovations, where engineers and scientists can focus on saying, let's do things to improve the way of working, let's invest in our tools, invest in our systems, invest in our platforms. We do monthly town halls where we talk about where the company is headed. We share a lot of information. So I think there's lots of different things we can go on. Obviously, for time, I won't cover it. But I think the better point is I think we need to focus on the end-to-end experience. And I would remind even young engineers to not think of salary as the be-all, end-all, because salary high will only last you for 2 days. But after that, for the next few weeks and months, as long as you're in the company, if you don't enjoy your daily life, you will be having a lot more low moments, which will not really feel good. So try to balance a company which gives you both a salary high as well as focuses a lot on your day-to-day employee experience.
And very quickly, I think for the founders, right, one other piece of, I wouldn't say advice, but something that's worked for us. Don't just look at engineering numbers from how many lateral hires that you can make. I think after a certain point, you'll realize that we are not doing a really, really good job of utilizing engineers within the company itself. There is this syndrome of usual suspects. Happens to every company, happened in Phonepe. I'm sure it has happened with Dale in different times. You start depending on a small set of folks for a very large number of things, and everybody else seems to be supporting them. You need to very actively upskill. So we have a program called Phonepe University, which is basically, and I'm proud to say this, modeled around what an Infosys has done. They say that we will hire, we will train for our requirements. Now, the training is very different and the approach is very different. We basically try and upskill more in an accelerated manner so that it complements on the job through the Phonepe University so that people can start taking on more responsibility and utilizing your own workforce. So lateral hiring in numbers is not the only way to achieve what you want to achieve through your engineering workforce.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Just one question. So, in many engineering teams, right? We talked about like how hiring is tough. We talked about like how people should spend time on hiring and building a good culture internally. But what about how do you drive that culture and of ownership for engineering? Right. One of the key questions that a lot of people usually ask: are engineers as responsible for the are as aligned and as incentivized for the success of the organization? Let's say like how a front running sales team or a customer support team which is sitting on the front lines and handling customer queries day in day out, right, is right. Like, or what differentiates like engineering teams in a startup versus just a service delivery focused engineering teams?
I'll go. So I think it's something that we've talked about at Swiggy. And first of all, let me start by saying I don't think there is any broad generalization that we can make that engineering teams are maybe less mission driven versus a frontline business team. Frankly, I've had engineers and I've been on calls with them where we worked through the night from 9 p.m. when the issue happened all the way till 4 a.m. in the morning, just trying to make sure the systems are up so that people can order breakfast on Swiggy. And these are engineers who are from college, young engineers who just want to make sure that the systems can come up so that when the customers wake up in the morning at 7 a.m., Swiggy is back up and running. So I don't think there is any kind of such generalization we can make that A group is worse off than B group. But that said, I do think that one of the advantages that business has is that they are much closer to the customer than somebody sitting in tech. So when you are, especially in the world like Swiggy, where you have physical customers like the restaurant partners or the drivers, and when you are in the business front lines, you are talking to them on a daily basis. You have a lot more understanding of what issues the restaurant partners have. You have a lot more understanding of what issues the drivers have. And so that perspective of what the customer is saying gives you a lot of insight to be able to go back and drive action. And I think that's the challenge for tech, because we are sitting 2 layers behind maybe that frontline salesperson. So what we've done at Swiggy is we've basically built this customer connect programs where we've actually set up these different forums where an engineer can go visit a restaurant partner and they can be in a conversation with a restaurant manager and listen to what the restaurant manager is saying about what it takes to run a business. Or they can go and visit our customer service team and they can listen to calls from customers and they can see chats coming in from customers and understand what our customers are truly saying. Or they can actually go and drive along with the driver, where they can deliver food with the driver by enabling them, by enrolling as a driver in the system and going through the same process and the challenges that a driver has when they're fulfilling. So for us, this customer connect is a big focus area at Swiggy. We also are scaling it out in a big way. And for me, I think that's the single biggest reason why we may have a perception that tech teams are not as connected to the business as business teams. It's only because the information asymmetry that exists between the business team and the tech team. And if you can fix that gap, if you can bring your tech people closer to the customer, I think you will see a lot more impact and a lot more customer backward thinking from your tech team.
100%. I think the problem is only because if you treat the engineering organization as a delivery organization and the engineer as a coder, you will get what you are setting yourself up for. I think a good engineer always gets a high when they've actually solved an end problem for a consumer, whether it's a merchant, whether it's a client in a SaaS play, etc. Setting up a structure in a way that engineers are exposed to the problem statement directly, work with business, have the capability to ask business questions, have capability to ask marketing questions about how a campaign has performed at a brand level and translated to impact for a category. I think you need to actually set your engineers up like that. You need to actually ensure that data transparency is high. You need to actually have sessions around P&L and finances, what a burn looks like, what is an EBITDA with an engineer. If you want to actually pivot an organization, for example, towards profitability, I think what really fails is there are layers that get created and information is on a need to know basis and the problem has been solved, and then the engineer is told, okay, if you do this, this is the result. You're not, if you don't involve the engineer in the problem statement from early on, you will get basically the level of commitment that you can expect in a need to know basis.
Perfect. So we have few minutes left. Just quickly want to ask both of you one personal question. With everything happening around, and so much on your plate, right? How do you folks keep yourself centered and at the same time updated with all the technology changes that are happening in the ecosystem?
I think the way I do it personally is I pick a problem statement that I kind of own end to end. It also keeps my sanity going when you're actually doing what Dale called as the day job of prioritizing long term versus short term and having all those discussions. Whatever it takes to actually learn from the perspective of that problem statement, I learn. I don't necessarily keep myself updated on all technologies. I have a great team around me. The architects are there. They bring me up to speed when needed. I operate in a very decentralized manner. I don't claim to be, just because I'm the CTO of the company, I don't claim to know anything and everything that is out there on technology. So yeah, I think that's the real answer.
Thanks, Rahul. Yes, Dave.
Yeah, from mine, I think there's one thing which for me has been a very important aspect, which is just this curiosity that I've had. And this is something that predates even Swiggy, but I felt that for me, I'm just very curious about stuff. And it doesn't have to be tech. It could also be about business. It could also be about certain kind of topics that have come up in public domain. So I just find myself reading a lot. I think I spend a lot of time. In fact, my family will always complain about me being on the phone, but I'm just browsing stuff. I'm reading. I read blogs. I read articles. I have audiobooks that I listen to when I'm in the gym, or I have Kindle books that I read when I'm traveling to office. So what I find is that this, I guess, innate behavior that I have of just picking up a lot of information from disparate sources helps me, because at some point in time, I find that the dots start to connect. And I may have read this article about something here, and I read some article about something here. Then I'm able to see that dots connect, and then I bring it back to Swiggy and say, maybe we should investigate this particular aspect of the tech, or maybe there's something interesting happening with auto ML that we should really look at. So I think one thing that we should all do, and we should continue to do until the day we die, is to always be learning and always be curious. And if you are doing that, and if you're trying to make time and always be able to keep that spark alive, I'm sure you will stay abreast with everything happening, and probably you will also be ahead of many other people in terms of the knowledge and insight that you can bring.
Perfect. I really love it, Dave. Just one thing, like what is the last book, engineering or otherwise, that that you are reading that you would recommend to other folks?
So I don't know about recommending, but I think there are lots of books I'm reading. And right now I'm reading a book which is actually very interesting. It's based on this entire bubbles that we have, these Bitcoin bubble, or even tech funding bubbles, and it's called The Popular Delusion of Extraordinary Crowds. And it's actually a book that talks about how human behavior over the centuries has been very similar to what we're seeing today. When we think of Bitcoin as a bubble, frankly, in 200, 300 years back, people were selling tulip bulbs, the tulip flower. They were selling the tulip bulbs as currency in many parts of Europe. And even somebody like Newton, who was an amazing, of course, a brilliant scientist, actually fell for one of the South Sea bubbles and invested and lost all his money there. So I'm reading that book because for me, it's also like a reflection of human behavior. And that's just something that came across. So I've picked it up.
Thanks a lot, Dave. Thanks, Rahul. It's been really fun talking to both of you. And we have Kanan back to take it from us.
Thank you so much, guys. Everybody watching, that was building tech platforms for scale. Actually, the only unanswered question that remains is how CTOs expect developers to have 5 years experience in a 1-year-old technology. But this is me speaking as an ex-developer from back in the day. For everybody watching, I hope you enjoyed the session. Just to remind you once again that there's a leaderboard on AirMeet for the most engaged attendees. To earn points, visit the booth and raise questions and stand a chance to win a 3-bedroom house in Bangalore. No? Okay, well then something good only. Something equivalent, I'm assured. Our next panel will be a slightly maybe contentious one. It's about IPOs. And so that's all for this session. I'll see you guys in a minute over at the new one. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for your time.